Dreams are definitely one of the most important yet mysterious things that involves humans. And I know other things dream, but for us it seems like there's something deep going on there. And our lives can definitely be divided up into sort of a waking life and a sleeping life. And there are some dreams that you never forget. And there are others that seem all too easy to forget about. You know, you forget about them within just a few minutes, but I have 3 dreams that I will never forget. And they were from my childhood. These days I don't really dream a lot. There's been times where I've dreamed intensely for a month or 2 months. There's been spans of years where I didn't dream at all. It seems kind of sporadic, but there's never been a dream, whether my own or a dream that I've heard from somebody else, that didn't have an obvious, very obvious interpretation. Every time without fail, no matter what the dream is, there is an obvious interpretation, and not only that, there is information in the dreams that one actually learns from, which is very, very strange. Imagine a situation where a person falls asleep at night, dreams, wakes up the next day, interprets the dream, and learns something new. That happens all the time. And sometimes when I talk to people, like friends and different people I've met in the past, they'll either bring up dreams or I'll ask about them because I'm always curious, And it seems the sorts of people who have different types of dreams seem to carry a pattern too, because some people have nightmares for all of their life. And I think I've had maybe 2 nightmares in my entire life, like 2 actual dreams that I could classify as nightmares. And one of the most important elements of a dream is, one component is the actual events, symbols, characters, things that you see. But another equally as important component is how it feels. Because you can have relatively benign components and images, but a feeling that completely changes the character and context of the dream and what it means. Some dreams are very, very short and simple. Like one of the dreams that I had that I would consider a nightmare was very simple. It was almost like a stage, with a wooden floor and curtains on the side. The curtains were open, and it was just like a head or a face with this really creepy smile, and the head was just spinning. Even thinking about it, it's that plus the feeling. I'm like, I woke up and I was like, whoa, wow, that was strange. I remember thinking, what was that for? Because sometimes that messed up my whole day. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it's those ones that end up being memorable, the ones that seem to affect your entire day. You actually sit there and think about it and wonder about it, like, what could that even mean? And the face wasn't really a particularly terrible face. It was just the smile, the static, strange smile. And It was scary. I was relatively young back then. And, yeah. And I'm not the sort of person who has recurring dreams, but think too how strange of a situation it is to go into a dream state, where literally anything is possible, any potential, and you have the same one over and over again. Those ones seem to be the most urgent. Those ones seem to have some sort of message, some sort of revelation that needs to happen. And these nightmares can be horrific. I mean, horrific. They can, borderline devastate a person's life. I mean, imagine being afraid to go to sleep, to where it's that bad. And most dreams I've had have been pleasant. If there's any kind of recurring dream that I've had, it's been of me walking around like a house in a house party. And people are just sort of at the party, doing what you would typically imagine a bunch of people at a house party doing, just having a good time. And that's it. That's the entire dream. I've had that dream over the course of my life sporadically, just every once in a while. And, dreams aren't always a message that are trying to tell you something new. Sometimes it's just like the activity of your imagination. When you're thinking about something pleasant, or when you're thinking about a dream about the future, about something you actually want to happen, or that feeling of nostalgia when you're sort of reminiscing, And strangely, the movie Terminator and plenty of other things were inspired by what could be considered a fever dream. James Cameron woke up sweating, and he had this dream, this image of a metallic machine surrounded by flames. And when he woke up, he had to start writing the Terminator plot. He just was completely dead set. And once he had seen that, he couldn't unsee it. Like, it was just so moving that it compelled him so greatly. And I don't think I've ever seen an actual meaningless dream. Sometimes I think that one nightmare that I had was simply for fear itself. Because across my lifetime, I don't think I've actually encountered true evil in its truest form, at least in its deepest form. I mean, I've heard plenty of things and read plenty of things, and I'm obviously aware of the accounts of that possibility, but it's never been present around me, or been imposing itself onto me. And that dream was just, that was the feeling, for sure. It was almost as if that actual feeling in and of itself was trying to exist somehow. Because that's all I can take from that one. It was just so simple. And the fact that it was a stage, almost like it was a showing. And it's strange too. The infinite, subconscious. You go to sleep at night, and it almost feels like entering a portal, because while we're awake, our strongest sense is our eyes. And our eyes and our vision dominate so much of our waking life. We have a chance to close them and the eyes sort of roll back. And once the external vision is no longer accounted for, no longer necessary, it's almost like the domain of the unconscious is free to take over, and sort of step in. And it does. And it's during that time that a combination of our previous experience and something new is happening. The fact that a dream can teach you something is one of the most strange things. It's almost like the unconscious is forming these images that represent sensations, and it's trying to put together both major components, for the most part in a linear style story. And throughout life so far, it's been really interesting to hear about people's dreams and then interpret them, and then see as they're like, wow, like some of this stuff is very, very, very specific. It's not like certain disciplines. It's not like astrology, even though astrology can be very specific. This is even more intimate in a way, because these dreams have a way of echoing, And it's weird too sometimes when you understand a certain dream and you sort of comprehend it. It's kind of unlikely that it'll recur. It's almost like a dream recurs because it needs that deciphering. Especially if it's not one of those happy dreams. One of the other dreams that I remember is just flying around through overpasses and over traffic and sort of, over grassy areas, over a city. And that was it, just flying around. My dreams are pretty boring for the most part, the few that I've had. Which is why it came as a surprise to hear about how complex other people's dreams can be, At first I wasn't sure. I was like, are you sure that was an actual dream? Because they can be so specific. But one of the key things to know is the feeling throughout. Because we can sit here while we're awake and consciously bring our imagination together and sort of dream while we're awake. And that involves a lessening of the sense of vision as well. Not necessarily focusing on anything in particular in your surroundings and going further and further into your mind. And I had a friend once who, he would have night terrors. And he said he would wake up and he wasn't able to move. He was somewhere between being asleep and awake. And those things that were part of his dreams would appear as real in his room. And he was one of those people that was afraid to go to sleep because of that. And later in life, I found out that he had some things going on from earlier in his life that heavily contributed to that. But I wasn't able to make that connection back then. It was only later when I found out. Because when you go to sleep at night, you turn the lights off and everything and you lay there. Very often, for the first time during the day, there are no distractions. And for some people, that's a great thing, you know. It's nice. And for others, it's terrible, you know. Because in the absence of light, you start to breach into that dream sector where the vision is less pronounced because you can't see that much. And the imagination slowly starts to take over. And it's easy to start to have both of those worlds clip into each other, you know. And I remember one time I was coming home from a music festival and I had taken all kinds of drugs, and I was laying in bed, and it was so strange. I don't know if it was the lingering effects of the drugs or what it was, but somehow, instead of completely falling asleep, I ended up laying there, but somehow my feeling, my nervous system, whatever you want to call it, completely slowly drifted out of my feet, and my legs, and my arms, and slowly just up all the way through to where it just felt like there was absolutely no feeling there whatsoever. It was almost like directly on that dividing line between asleep and awake, but I was wide awake. And I could move if I wanted to, but I didn't want to disrupt it because it felt so weird. It felt like, almost like being dead in a strange way, even though I was completely with it, you know. And it went a little bit further. If I laid there completely still, I could see this image of what looked like a giant forest in the background, but it was dark back there. And you could see these weird, almost like shamanistic teepees, you know. And in the middle was this giant blue flame. And these weird looking little goblin type dudes, almost like trying to say something. And I remember laying there just like happy, you know, like it felt good. And it was the weirdest thing being technically both asleep and awake at the same time. Because it's hard to describe, like, you know how when you kind of sit on your arm or whatever and it goes numb and you lose feeling in your hand? It's like that, but much, much more. Well, without that kind of spiky feeling. It had that kind of deadness. Like there's absolutely no feeling, no part of your nervous system that's even down there, you know, all throughout my entire body. And at first I moved a little bit just to make sure that I could still, you know, move if I wanted to. But that was a weird night. And because I couldn't sleep, I couldn't actually fall asleep because some of what I took was MDMA, which has a heavy stimulant. But this was hours and hours and hours after the prime of that. So it was kind of a residual, and I just couldn't fall asleep. But, you know, it was wearing off a little bit. It was enough to where I could, you know, relax, but not enough to fall asleep. But it was so strange. And I just remember it was a good feeling, though. But they were trying to say something, but you couldn't hear or see or discern anything like that. It was just clear that they were trying to speak. And it was just a strange scene, you know. And it wasn't anything that I had seen. So, and my imagination is good, but I don't know if it's quite that vivid, you know, to where it feels completely real, as if you're in a dream and it's full immersion, because you have that feeling when you're deep within a dream that you know this is real, you know. That feeling that you know that there isn't anything else but this, you know, as if your awareness is completely immersed there. And some people talk about lucid dreaming, and I've never done that. There's never been a time where I've been dreaming and I was aware that I was dreaming. Any time that happened, where that was imminent and I was about to possibly become aware, I would just wake up, you know. And, which is also weird too if you think about it. What a weird circumstance it is when you're asleep and you're dreaming, and as far as you're concerned, it's real life. As far as you're concerned, you're not dreaming, and that's all that there is. But right before you find out that you are dreaming, you wake up. Why? Why then? Why is it in the dream when you die or something, or something to that effect happens, you wake up? Why then? Why not continue dreaming and just wake up again? Is it because it would be obvious to you that you're dreaming? Hypothetically, like if you were in a dream and you died and then you were suddenly alive again, would that not be pretty clear evidence that you're in a dream? Which is why death usually wakes you up. It's like the dream doesn't want to be discovered. It's like it needs the immersion. It needs the dreamer to think and feel for sure that this is real. Otherwise, it's almost like it can't do what it needs to do. If you know it's a dream, it's almost like watching a movie. You know, it can't quite fully do what it needs to do. And some dreams reach quite an intensity, and some quite a complexity, to where it's impossible to call it meaningless or random. I mean, some of these things are so specific and their interpretation so obvious and so applicable and just loaded with wisdom sometimes. It completely calls into question the idea that a dream could be random. And the fact that it's coherent as well. The fact that it makes sense at all. I mean, in the vast unconscious of us. Because the dream, the whole world of the dream, is in and of itself the state of the shadow. Something Jung made famous. The shadow being the thing that is cast by anything that either happens in the waking life or the thing that we view as something positive or something that we like about ourselves that we would prefer to cast. The moment we cast ourselves, we also can't help but find an element with it that is its opposite, or the shadow. For example, if you meet somebody and you fall in love with them, one of the first things that hits the mind is the idea that you might lose them, which would be considered the shadow. The shadow aspect of falling in love is the possibility of losing them, the possibility of pain. And those two things can arise at the same time. And it is the mark of a person who is healthy, who is aware of those things, who considers those things and knows those things quite well. And it's just part of their overall thought process without trying to repress it or run away from it. And most, if not all things, have that component. In our waking life, we have the things that we prefer to cast. You could, if you wanted to, think of the waking life as sort of a light, and the dream world or the sleeping life, the dark. And there's so much about the unconscious too. It's not just our life or our experiences or our interpretations. It's also our complete familial history. The history of really the species as well. Our DNA. All still somehow in there. Not to the point of memories, but to the point of the most small fragments of information. If we, as people, are history currently stored in the present, if I am my parents' son, who are the sons and daughters of their parents, and so on all the way down, then I would be the living history of that lineage and everything that happened therein. And my personality, my physical characteristics are not only an outgrowth of my particular life, but my predispositions as well, just like with everybody else. But those things don't commonly come through the crosshairs of conscious attention. And that's where dreams come in. Dreams are the place where any and everything can make itself available to be useful in waking life. And not even necessarily for that purpose. Not everybody has it so clear cut because there's so much variety within that. And it's not always the easiest thing to explain why people have terrible, terrible, terrible nightmares. But it surely has something to do with how they're perceiving the world while they're awake. There is certainly a correlation, as well as with traumatic experiences or experiences that put heavy pressure on their emotional system and their nervous system. There have been deviations and splits, bombs that have gone off metaphorically, things that have been shattered and put back together. And the unconscious itself is the place where these things go to be part of the past, to be tucked away, to be sort of dealt with so one can move on, and ideally to be integrated. But it's when one falls asleep where these things can sort of reveal more of what's necessary, including revealing the fact that there is still an open wound somewhere. And there's something to be said of periods of time when we don't dream at all. Well, we're still getting very deep sleep, but we're not dreaming. And those periods of time, at least for me, are marked by periods of time that passes without very many pivotal pillars being laid down, you know. They're just sort of the filler time, I guess you could say. I don't really want to characterize it that way, but it's probably the closest thing, where there isn't anything too outstanding going on. But then again, with age, those periods of time have gone longer. And looking back, it has more to do with how I've interpreted events versus events themselves. Because as I've gotten older, when I was younger, I did experience what one might call anxiety. That sort of feeling, in the stomach and in the chest. But that had to do with how I interpreted myself and the world. And over time, there are still plenty of pivotal, pillar type events that happen, but the way I feel about them, interpret them, has changed to where I don't feel anxiety anymore. And it seems like anxiety itself has a lot to do with the types of dreams you have and the frequency of dreams, because anxiety can be pretty intense. And the sort of dreams that come within that can sort of add to it and build a momentum to where it just sort of increases and gets more and more and more. It's almost like dreams are, more than anything, trying to help a person learn how to interpret the world. Because it makes such a difference. Such a difference. When you're a little bit older, you just tend to have seen enough and done enough to interpret things in a way that does not result in anxiety. You just don't feel anxious. I mean, fear may come, but you can swallow that relatively easily and just do what you have to do. But when you're younger, you don't know that. You don't know necessarily how things go. You don't really have a momentum built. You haven't proven that much. You haven't shown that much. And with time, it seems, and through meeting quite a number of people, you seem to know enough and have seen enough, and you have momentum going in such a way that you just don't feel anxiety, which seems to be one of the main things that drives the types of dreams that people have, as well as people's experience before they fall asleep. Because people, that anxiety can be felt throughout the day. In certain situations especially can bring it out, but it's when a person lays down at night that these things can really start to get at you. And it just so happens that this bridges right into sleep. And then a person sleeps and dreams and then wakes up the next day with all of the preceding interpretations and events stacked on top of it. And then you go through another day and another and another. And you keep going through this until such a time as the anxiety itself can be alleviated. Then I think what's happening with dreams has to be a part of that. There's no way it can't be, especially when you consider the fact that it's so easy to see what a dream is trying to say. And it's just been, I can't reiterate how specific dreams have been for people and how clear the messages and how applicable they've been in people's lives. Like it's actually been pretty astounding to see people listen to interpretations of their dreams and just have this like eureka moment. Surprising that sort of system can exist within a person day and night, day and night. And then it's the interpretation that changes. Interpreting the difference between change and the same line of momentum is the interpretation of the dream, not just the dream itself. Because the dream can happen and, if anything, confuse a person more. If anything, make them more anxious. But once the person interprets it themselves or somebody else interprets it, it can completely change the way the person not only interprets that dream, but other things as well. And considering sleeping is such a massive part of life. If you do dream, you should try to interpret them, because it has been highly uncommon that they didn't have a highly applicable interpretation. But if your dreams are pleasant, generally, and maybe a little nostalgic, then, it's not so much an interpretation you're looking for. It seems to be when it brings up negative sensations or anxieties that there's some sort of tangle there, or some sort of psychological or emotional knot. That is a common emotion that we all feel too, something that we would all understand, but it's interpreted maybe a little bit more extremely. And it's combined with other emotions to turn it into a different shade. Let's say something a little bit more mysterious and difficult to see. And it's just so interesting that exists for us. And if a person closes their eyes and sits quietly, those things that they dream about at night may start to show up right then and there. Because that's how the subconscious is. That there's a series of priorities there, whether we're fully aware of it or not. And there's such a vast array of people on Earth who all want the same thing. And everybody needs love. Everybody needs connection. Everybody needs people of quality around them who care. Absolutely. But sometimes all it takes is one person like that, of a true nature, to change things, because it is important to have other people besides yourself helping you, and it's a whole other thing to have recurring dreams in our waking life that are aspirational, things that call, things that we can't get out of our minds, that we're always kind of driving toward. And that's almost the light version, let's say. It's so much like a left and a right, and night and day, those two things that feed off each other. Satisfaction in the day and satisfaction at night is a completely different experience, obviously, than dissatisfaction with one or both. And sometimes there are factors and variables that are so clear that we just can't quite see. And it's interesting being a human being to even have this capacity in us, because we're going to go through our entire lives and never physically see our own brains. We're never going to see our own hearts, our own kidneys. But that knowledge, that visual knowledge, will not change how they function. We'll never need a manual on how to use our kidneys or pump our heart. But when it comes to the mind and the soul and the brain, it is only interpretation that we're given, the ability to interpret. And it's actually a pretty powerful thing.